उजिर मगर, हरिचन्द्र छन्त्याल, झकेन्द्र घसी मगर र गोविन्द छन्त्याल मिलेर सम्पादन गर्नुभएको किताब ढोर पाटन इतिहास, समाज र अर्थ राजनीतिमाथि छलफल। तीनजना स्पिकर्स विल बी कमेन्टिङ अन द बुक। दुईजना स्पिकर्स नवीन विवास र सुषमा बराली र हरिचन्द्र छन्त्याल विल एक्चुली देन स्पिक अन बिहाफ अफ द एडिटोरियल टिम। र त्यसपछिको अरू प्रोग्राम्सहरू यो हाम्रो फ्लायरमा मेन्सन छ। 2 महिना जति अगाडि हाम्रो एनुअल नेपाली जर्नल 2 महिना भएको छैन समाज अध्ययनको 20 नम्बरको इस्यु छापियो। त्यसमा चाहिँ शिक्षा इतिहास विशेष भनेर 3-4 आर्टिकल्सहरू चाहिँ एजुकेसन हिस्ट्री सम्बन्धी छ। यु क्यान रिड द्याट इन द लाइब्रेरी हियर ओर बाई इट। अनि लास्ट विकतिर अब 10 days ago or even not लास्ट विकतिरै हो के अरे यो स्टडिज इन नेपाली हिस्ट्री इन सोसाइटीको चाहिँ सबभन्दा रिसेन्ट इस्यु भोल्युम 13 नम्बर 1 निस्क्यो। यु क्यान अल्सो रिड द्याट इन आवर लाइब्रेरी। बट इफ यु वान्ट टु पर्चेस कपिज द्याट्स ओन्ली अभाइलेबल विथ आवर पब्लिसर मण्डला बुकको। अरू अनाउन्समेन्टहरू छैन भने चाहिँ लेट्स जस्ट गो अराउन्ड द रुम इन्ट्रोड्युसिङ आवरसेल्फ भेरी ब्रिफली। मेरो नाम चाहिँ प्रतिशोध हो, म यहीँ चौतारीमा काम गर्छु।
मेरो नाम आमिना, म पिएचडी स्टुडेन्ट एन्ड पोलिटिक्स।
नमस्ते, म सचिन घिमिरे, म फिल्म कलेजमा रिसर्च पढाउँछु। नमस्ते, म कुमार पाण्डे, म चौतारीसँग आएको छु।
नमस्ते, म राजेश सागर, म पनि पढाउँछु।
Namaskar, everybody. I'm Pushpa Kumar, and I'm also a educated research. Namaskar. मेरो नाम विपिन सेल्चन, म चाहिँ PhD scholar at Kathmandu University in Indigenous Education and Development. Thank you. I'm Amina, teacher, my professor.
नमस्ते, म रोएला थके, रिटायर्ड कमिसनर।
मेरो नाम सञ्जिला मक्तान, म यहाँ काम गर्छु।
म तेल रोप्ने नमस्कार, म गोविन्द बास्के।
नमस्ते, म देशना श्रेष्ठ, म मार्टिन चौधरीमा आएको छु।
नमस्कार।
नमस्ते, काम।
नमस्ते, म प्रमोद।
नमस्ते, म किरण।
नमस्कार, म गुन्जन खनाल।
नमस्कार, म रील कुमार।
नमस्ते, म सुषमा सत्य, नमस्कार।
नमस्ते, म चाहिँ सम्राट।
नमस्ते, म अवसर सुनिया सुनिकेला।
परिचय यहाँ सबैलाई धन्यवाद। पहिलोचोटि आउनुभएको पनि 1-2 जना हुनुहुन्छ कि जस्तो लाग्यो कि होइन हो, तपाईँलाई विशेष स्वागत। अनि आजको 2 जना हाम्रो साथीहरू चाहिँ प्रणब मान सिंह र अमिना सिंह, 2 जनालाई काठमाडौँ युनिभर्सिटीमा पढाउने काम गर्नुहुन्छ। प्रणबले अहिले डिपार्टमेन्ट अफ आर्ट एन्ड डिजाइनमा, अमिनाले त्यो डिपार्टमेन्टमा पनि पढाउनु भएको छ। अमिनाले काठमाडौँ युनिभर्सिटीमा पढाउनु बाँकी स्कुल चाहिँ स्कुल अफ मेडिसिन मात्र होला है। स्कुल अफ मेडिसिनमा पढाएको छैन, यो स्कुल अफ आर्ट्स, स्कुल अफ म्यानेजमेन्ट र स्कुल अफ एजुकेसन उहाँले पढाइसक्नु भएको छ। र अगेन स्टार्टिङ इन अगस्ट विल बी टिचिङ इन द स्कुल अफ एजुकेसन। अगेन आजको गफ गर्ने सन्दर्भ चाहिँ कसरी तयार भएको भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ हामी अमिनाजीलाई विभिन्न ठाउँमा भेट्दाखेरि एटलिस्ट वर्षमा 1-2 चोटि चाहिँ चौतारीमा बोल्नुपर्छ भन्न मिलाउनुको लागि विभिन्न मिल्ने तरिकाबाट उहाँलाई हामी जिस्काइरहेको हुन्छौँ। र यो काममा चाहिँ सेरा तामाङ र म उत्तिकै को कन्सपिरेटर्स हो, यहाँ पछाडि हुनुहुन्छ उहाँ। त्यसै कारण त्यो गर्दा गर्दै धेरै महिना अगाडि कुराकानी हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ अनि अमिनाजीले चाहिँ प्रणब पनि स्टुडेन्ट भएको, तपाईँ पनि हो भएको, यो बेसिकली काठमाडौँ युनिभर्सिटीको स्कुल अफ, यो कुन स्कुल अन्तर्गत पऱ्यो? स्कुल अफ आर्ट्स अन्तर्गत प्र्याक्टिसिङ आर्टिस्ट र अलिअलि नन प्र्याक्टिसिङ आर्टिस्टहरूलाई पनि रिसर्च पढाउँदाखेरिको अनुभवको गफ गरौँ न भनेर भन्नुभयो। त्यसपछि अनि आजको बेसिकली सन्दर्भ, द ब्याकग्राउन्ड इज द्याट। सो दे आर गोइङ टु बी टकिङ टु each other and us for about roughly 45 minutes. पहिला सुरुमा they have some slides. Most of it, the conversation is going to be in English, so don't worry. Some occasionally, as is the tradition here, will be in Nepali. the subsequent discussion can be in either language. So if you need translations, I can do that. So all yours.
Thank you, Protestri. Thank you, Madam Chautari, for this opportunity. Before we start, just a disclaimer.
It's not on. It's on.
Just a disclaimer about it. We're choosing to call this a conversation because the ideas that we're sharing today, they are still like very emergent. We're hoping to write a paper together on this. So this is like just a preliminary exploration of the topic itself. So basically what we're trying to do today is basically, I use the word basically a lot, is to ask questions, to raise questions. So we're not here to present answers. We're not making strong assertions or claims about how to teach research in the arts. So those of you who kind of come with that expectations, sorry to disappoint you. We do have other colleagues here who have also been collaborators in this project, Aston and Jameson. They've also been very instrumental in this intellectual endeavor of figuring out how to teach in the MFA program. And we also have some people who were on the receiving end of our experimentation of trying to teach research. So that's the beginning. Just a framework of what we'll do is we'll do a brief introduction of where we are, who we are, a little bit about the KU MFA program because that's the context in which we're having this conversation. And then 3 and 4 will be the main meat of the conversation. Teaching research in the arts. There's a global discourse on what constitutes research in the arts. So where does our work fit into that broader discourse? And then the teaching practices, like what do you do in the classroom? How do you design the instructions? And the most tricky area of that is how do you do evaluations? How do you do assessments? And then finish it off with Q&A. I'll hand it over to Pranab to start with your introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, I've been teaching at the KU Department of Art and Design since 2009. So it's been a while since I've been teaching, but mostly I've been teaching in the undergrad bachelor's study program. My own sort of educational background is I studied here in Nepal until 12th grade. I was in St. Xavier's for most of that time here. And then I went to the US, did my undergrad degree in philosophy with a specialization in aesthetics, and continued studying aesthetics in Germany as well. My, I guess, lineage in terms of philosophy is sort of continental philosophy, so I read like a lot of German philosophers and French philosophers mostly that wrote about art in particular and had a very particular focus in terms of culture as well. I ended up teaching in KU after I came back to Nepal and started doing some other work around literature and art. And when I first began teaching, I think I took a lot of what I had learned in my undergrad degree and sort of tried to tailor it to what I thought would be useful in Nepal. I think the past, I guess, 15 years or so of teaching has been sort of educational to me in the sense of deconstructing a lot of the ways that I thought education should happen or the particular ideas that I thought would be useful here. So when I first started, I'd say I started teaching with a very sort of Western art historical lens. Right now, I think I've kind of gone halfway to the other end extreme, of sort of incorporating Western ideas, but talking about it more in relation to the ideas and conversations that were happening and have been happening and are happening in our part of the world. So just that's, yes, a brief introduction to my teaching sort of journey.
Thanks for that, Pranab, and thanks for that. I think one of the top things you said is a lot of your teaching is influenced by how you were taught in undergrad education. And I think the way I teach research is in a similar manner. If I look at my teaching history, I started teaching, well, I had taught various courses in the management program because my prior degree before that was in management. I had an MBA from the United States and I worked as a management consultant for about 10 years in Nepal, during which I was doing a lot of training programs, proposal writing programs, and during which I kind of came to realize one of the challenges that a lot of the participants in the training program were having was how to problematize an issue, how to create the rationale for designing a project. And so for me, it was like, we need to teach research skills in Nepal was one big issue in my head. I did my PhD in education, in adult learning, how people learn from everyday experiences and interest. But I came back to Nepal in 2015 and immediately joined the School of Education. And the bulk of the teaching I've done in the three schools, in School of Arts, School of Education, and School of Management, has been mostly teaching research methodology, and particularly taking the more the qualitative approach, because my research practice was mostly qualitative. So I've taught school leaders in the education program, principals and teachers, in School of Management, mostly management students, and I also did 3 cohorts teaching in the School of Management for public policy, so policy research, but particularly the courses that I taught was focusing on critical and integrated policy analysis, where also I was talking about these different kinds of paradigms other than the positivistic paradigm. So when the MFA program was launched, which we will discuss in a bit, I was approached to teach research, and I was like, it just didn't resonate with me. It's like, why me? I know nothing about the arts, and I know nothing about the practice of art, so why should I be teaching this course? After several conversations, I was kind of convinced at some level that maybe I can do something, and I thought it would be a good learning experience for me. But I had kind of faced one condition. I had worked with Pranab over the years. We'd worked together in teacher education programs. Pranab was also kind of running this book bus library event where we were doing a lot of teacher education program. So, and I knew his work, his teaching experience as well. So my condition was I get to work with Pranab. Pranab would be my co-teacher or colleague in designing the program, and so that's how we ended up working together when KU launched the first cohort of KU MFA program. So we taught over 3 semesters, I think. I'll let you kind of explain the KU program.
So the Masters in Fine Arts degree is sort of considered a terminal degree. Until recently, it was sort of the terminal degree that an artist would get if they went through a formal education process. Nowadays, there are more and more PhD programs coming up in the arts itself. So you could potentially do a PhD in visual art or sculpture or something like that. But when I started teaching back in 2009, there was really no conversation about MFA, but I think within 3-4 years of me having started teaching, which is the TU-run program, fine arts program, they started an MFA program, and after that, the KU sort of administration and the school itself started showing an interest in starting an MFA program in KU. So, in some sense, because I was teaching the undergrad program, I was sort of privy to a lot of the conversations that were happening around setting up the MFA program, conversations in terms of what should it do, how should it be set up, what would make it different from the TU program. A lot of those conversations were sort of happening over the years. But it took a while, but the program only started off with the first batch in 2002. 2002. Sorry, 2020. But one of the things that I had the, I guess, privilege of being a part of with this program was I was partly involved in those conversations from an early stage, but I also got to be a student in the program as well. So I took part in the program. There was different streams within the program.
Slide is not showing.
Yeah.
There.
So this is the sort of breakdown of the program itself. It's a 2-year program, 4 semesters. One thing you'll notice is there's a pretty strong research component in terms of research methods. The idea of the program is that someone who's part of the program comes with a certain set of skills within the arts. So they're familiar with like at least one type of like visual medium or something sort of cursory related to the arts. They produce something within the program year, within the 2 years of the program. But they also produce a written work that is sort of a reflection of the research and study that they undertook during the program. So in terms of, yeah, I think I'll stop here for now and look at the program. We can go into more detail as we
So I'll ask you questions based on this, but I remember when I was being asked to teach the research for the arts program, my question is, why do artists need to learn research? That didn't come from a place that research science at all. But it's like what is the practical value of that? Because I think for me, and one of the, I said probably unconscious biases I had when I was teaching educational leaders, for instance, research. I had this strong idea that principals need to understand, what's working and what's not working in the education system, and for that they can only do that through research, and they need to build knowledge around that. So that's why they need research, and so they need particular methodologies for that. In management, it was also like kind of clear cut. But one of the things I did do, I think, was looking at what is the dominance in the disciplinary field, and that was where I was already seeing distinctions between teaching education, teaching in management, and teaching in policy research. I think the policy sector was the area where quantitative approaches was the most dominant, and qualitative research was really critical, and interpretive research was highly marginalized to the point that it was like kind of relegated as something is useless, like why even do this shit? So I'm so sorry for that word, but it was that kind of attitude, because numbers mean a lot in public policy, and to make arguments, to make strong policy decisions, you need numbers. So why do you tell stories? And so there was this different kind of biases across, and I think if I were this is a very fickle judgment on my part, but I think in School of Education, qualitative research was actually embraced a lot more than in other fields. So for me, it was like I had no clue about what it is like in the arts, because I had no exposure to research in the arts, and I had my own assumptions that artists are these very creative people. They're very open. They don't look at the world in a very rigid way. So I kind of brought all of this, and so my question continuously, when I remember you and I sat through hours and hours of coffee drinking and discussing this, is like, what do I need to teach? Like, because teaching research there's so much you can teach there, but if I had to package it into a 3-semester coursework, what are the basic required, like what are the skills? For me, I think I was going back down to what are the learning outputs? What do we want the students to get from this course? Was a question I was asking again and again, and I was kind of hoping answers from Pranab based on his BFA experience. Like a student that graduates from BFA, then what more do we need to teach them to become researchers? Was my question. So I want you to kind of speak a little bit about what's the practice in general, maybe just in KU, but what's your observation on how bachelor level students are taught research in the arts, and what was your interpretation of the learning needs in the MFA level?
So within the BFA program, I've been teaching art history and critical theory, and I also sort of support dissertation writing in the BFA. one of the requirements of BFA students is they do a final year project where they sort of produce an artwork. But along with that, they're also required to do some research and produce a dissertation. The idea for the dissertation is sort of, I'd say there's two sort of factors that are in play when research is considered within these programs. One is sort of internal to the university itself, in terms of how knowledge is valued and sort of assessed within Kathmandu University. There's a sort of general sort of, I'd say, neglect in terms of like considering art as a knowledge product. So unless it's written down, it's formatted in a particular way, it's written in a particular way, it's produced in a particular way, it's not really considered like knowledge production work. These are biases that sort of exist within the universities and within disciplinary sort of setups, I think. So I think one of the reasons that there was even a dissertation requirement within the BFA was to sort of address that sort of perception that all that the artist did was like make something and sort of show it to the world and say that. So I think that was one of the reasons that the dissertation itself was there. The other reason I think is it is broader in scale in terms of how the art world and the artistic fraternity itself is sort of changing over time. I think there's in some sense, an encroachment of academia into the arts, in the sense that universities are increasingly becoming centers that define how art should be made, what is considered good art, having certain sort of prescriptive notions in terms of like, you have to be able to produce and speak and say things in certain ways, using certain vocabularies in order to be able to be considered an artist. This is sort of accentuated, I think, by a lot of the artwork products like biennales, art fairs, all of these things are sort of posited around like thematic ideas or political ideas in which the artist has to sort of respond to worldly events or worldly ideas and sort of articulate their position within that. So, and I think like nowadays, to be a successful artist, or I would say a successful artist, to be an artist that is engaged in contemporary politics or contemporary sort of art world events, you do need to sort of engage with that kind of politics and that kind of articulation. I think there's still space in some sense for an artist who doesn't and just produces landscapes, much landscapes and all that stuff. But if you want to sort of get the global art circuit, then you need to first, in some ways, define yourself as an artist, and then secondly, have a sort of critical political position. So, for our students, I think these become sort of apparent the moment that they graduate, like when they want to start engaging with the wider world and wider art world, I should say, they need those articulations in place. So the dissertation component was partly guided by those ideas, and the theory components were guided by that within the art program. Is that so?
I can kind of add a bit. What Pranab just basically explained was the stuff I learned. Because a lot of the stuff, like I wasn't aware of what was the thinking in, and what were the different movements going on in the art world, and how it was influencing the art practice in Nepal. Would you be correct if I assume that the somewhat like there was an increasing dominance of conceptual movement going on, where the idea was almost like was taking primacy in the artistic individual, right? And just I'm kind of reiterating what he said was, but my understanding going into it was, how does an artist's work get regarded as knowledge, right? Art just as an aesthetic practice, but art as a contribution to knowledge, right? So that was I think one of the discourses, and that we could have a whole conversation around that. I remember in one of the classrooms we had this long discussion on what is art, right? Because if the moment we see art as the expression of knowledge, a human expression to have a better understanding of the world, to enhance our understanding of the world, then what art what kind of work gets deemed as art then, you know, those two things, right? What is art and what is knowledge, and how do those two interlink? And I think that was a very critical question, but we also wanted, so for me, I think I remember having this conversation with you was, going into it, we want the students to have some of the basic research skills down, which was, you know, reading, understanding different concepts, being able to apply those concepts in their work, and then being able to articulate that, speak up, do artist talk, write about it, use it in the artist statement. So how to even craft an artist statement to express what you want the audience to take away from your art. What is your idea that inspires? Those were some of the academic skills, but I think we also wanted the students to engage in these larger conversations and be a little bit more reflexive about why they do what they do, because as someone engaging in the art world on the periphery, and some of my, I have some very good friends, and I've been kind of admiring and appreciating Ashmina's work. I have become familiar that there are all these words you also use in the artwork. You know, the word decolonization comes up a lot. Ideas of feminism also come a lot. I remember in our first semester when we were, you know, kind of helping them, engaging with students to come up with their research ideas. One of the dominant ideas that was coming up was modern versus tradition. You know, how do we fuse the modern and the tradition? I was very intrigued, like why, where does this interest come from to do a fusion of the modern and the tradition? So, so I had all these questions about why it is the way it is, and I was kind of doing it as a critical bystander, not knowing enough about it. But I think throughout the semester, I kind of got deeper into it, and like you said, the academization of artistic practices that has happened over the years, where the practice of art is being trying to fit into other kinds of scholarly practices, and it's kind of being boxed up to kind of legitimize the knowledge. So that has been one thing. But we've had this conversation, and I think we have to kind of also talk about how the practice of teaching research in the arts has kind of flourished in academia. We have to kind of situate it within how universities have also evolved over the years with, you know, the influence of neoliberalism. Some scholars have even talked about the capitalist paradigm. There are different kinds of research paradigms, and one paradigm is the capitalist paradigm, where you produce research to serve the market, and knowledge is just a commodity. And we've talked about that, how, you know, some artists, some students would say, like, you know, their idea would be, and there's nothing wrong about it, but it's just being aware of what ideas are framing your approaches, right? So how can I do this so that it sells better in the market? How can I produce this so it gains a market, you know? So those sorts of ideas. So I think, so for us, I think we wanted to have these conversations on that. And this is where I want to kind of talk a little bit, maybe you can talk about it later, about Lewis's class on being contemporary. I remember in the first semester, I kind of struggled a bit with running the classes, because I realized a couple of things. For a lot of the students, they were not really used to reading a lot of dense literature that talks about these complex ideas. A lot of them are within the post-structuralist, postmodernist paradigm as well. A lot of it is very vague and, you know, obtuse, and that also in English. And then a lot of them were not very used to writing as well. So, and then I think in the second semester, Dilos came in with this seminar class on being contemporary, and I could see a shift in the students in the second semester, the way they would engage with our research methodology class, having and connecting it with what they read in Dilos' class. I remember that one particular day, and I bring this up a lot, you know, when they read Mark Fisher's capitalist realism, it was almost like they had an epiphany, and the way they saw things was very different. What's that, Braden Sweetgrass? Is that the book? I think that was also. So there are a couple of texts that you had used that had all, like, kind of given them a lot of food for thought that really helped them look at their work in a different way. And I think having that course was so useful and was so beneficial for the students, but it also, I think, helped us a lot in running the classes as well. But on the side, I think we constantly, a constant struggle, and this is not specific to teaching research in the arts. This is a struggle I've had across the board is how to teach, if it can be taught, how to read and write. I think that was the constant struggle I had on the side. Do you want to add anything to what I just said or any response?
I think just in terms of, I have a question, I should say. Could you sort of share your expectations in terms of like teaching research to artists? Like, can you just speak about like how you're sort of framing the idea? Because I find it quite interesting.
Yeah, I know where this question is coming from. Because I remember when one of the things I kept on asking Pranab is, look, I'm teaching artists, so how do I do this? And so we came to this conversation on, is there a disciplinary way of teaching research? Does teaching research need to be confined to a discipline? To which Pranab thinks no, right? You can kind of do you want to say what you said there?
Well, I think one of the things that sort of distinguishes working in the arts or doing art is that you're not constricted by disciplinary boundaries. And I think like one of the challenges that a lot of I should say academics have with research that happens in the arts is because they can't define it within a particular disciplinary boundary almost. I think in general, like research has been sort of, there's a strong positivist sort of influence within research where the idea of research is to make it replicable, to sort of present an idea that you can sort of take and apply to other locations and situations and that harkens back to sort of these positivist ideas of universal and objective kinds of knowledge where the knowledge is sort of independent of the researcher. In the arts, there's no escaping who you are as an artist. Essentially, like when you do research in the arts, you are doing research on yourself in some ways. You have to invest the knowledge into yourself in some ways. So what you practice and what you learn are sort of intertwined in that sense. So the way that the program itself is structured, if you look at it, it's partly geared towards having this sort of engagement between practice and ideas and have them inform each other so that the practice sort of leads to realizations in terms of ideas and the ideas lead to changes in practice.
Yeah, so do you want me to take it from here? So, Pranab was just making an allegation to academics, that academics kind of confined into this, which is kind of true, and I think that was my position, having taught primarily in the social science field, and I think I had also implicit, although I said that I thought a lot mostly in qualitative research and taken the critical approach, I think I had been accustomed to thinking of teaching research in a very linear way, right? You start with a research question, you find a gap in the literature, and you use that to frame your research, you develop the argument for research, and then you design a methodology and how you're going to find the answer to that question and apply those methodologies that have been tried and tested and justify those methods, and then produce propositional knowledge, right? Saying this is how things are, right? And so, so then I was confronted with this question, is art research like social science research? And I think because I didn't know any other way, that was my go-to. And I remember kind of failing at trying to teach research in the traditional way, in the way I had taught. I wouldn't call it traditional, but the way I had been used to teaching in the social sciences. And what I find useful is Hank Borgdorf, I don't know if I can say that word, his paper, when he talks about the debates in research in the arts, and there's another author, Henk Slager, that I just Slager, it's a Dutch name. I just recently discovered the pleasure of research. It kind of opened my eyes and my awareness to the broader discourse, the global discourse on art research. And he asked this question: when does an art practice count as research? Right? Where does the line, where is the line between that distinction, or if there is a distinction? Are all artistic practices implicitly research, or are there some kinds of artist practices that are not necessarily research, they're just there for the aesthetic value? So I think this question kind of was something that I kind of struggled with, and worked of kind of outlines like 3 different broader practices, which kind of builds on, let me just get the names right, on the work of Christopher Frayling, who kind of made that distinction. He said there are 3 broader practices: research into the art, research for art, and research through art. And then Borgdorf kind of did a little bit of wordplay on that, and he kind of lays out 3 different ways of doing research in the arts. Research for the art, research on the arts, which he calls the integrative way of doing art. So there's an artistic, it could be a piece of music, it could be a film, it could be a piece of writing, it could be a performance, it could be any medium mode of artistic expression, and you research on it. And in this paradigm, he claims that a lot of the practices fall within the traditional social science approaches, where you use those different kind of discourse analysis and all these different kind of tools to do that. Then there's the research for the arts, where you do research to produce your art, which is, he calls the instrumental approach to doing research. So you might be doing research on the different materials, right? And what, or the methods of your art practice or something like. So you do a research. So there, the process and the outcome are very distinct. You end up with a piece of work that may not necessarily be the knowledge production of your research, right? And then research in the arts, which he calls the one that is most contentious, which is the performative. So it's like the artistic practice in itself is the research process. And for me, I'm still trying to understand that, like, how does that work? I think there were a couple of examples we looked at in the course that we have, but I'm also looking at, for instance, Ashmina's work that she does in the performance. Like, in the process of doing the performance, there's knowledge production happening. And if you look at it like that, I think it kind of dispels, it kind of deconstructs some of our traditional ideas about what is knowledge, how is knowledge produced in artistic expression, and what is the methodology. Because I remember we read a paper as well, and sometimes just asking questions. So if the audience are compelled to question and generate very useful questions about how we view society as a result of engaging a piece of artistic work, that is a form of knowledge production. It may not be a paper, but just the act of questioning, or if it generates a conversation, that is also a mode of knowledge production. So, do you want to add something to what I just said? Because I could go on and on.
I think one way that research in the arts differs, just going back to my earlier point, is where the kind of intention that an artist might have. Sometimes, well, I think with more traditional sort of social science research, and even research within the humanities, I'd say the research has a clear intention or a clear problem that it tackles. There's a research question that is sort of presented. But the artist doesn't necessarily always start with the problem. It is one way to sort of think about it. There might be an intention of expression or intention of sort of sharing or creation that is part of what the artist sees as a problem, to some degree, frame it as a problem. But it's not as clearly defined as in the social sciences or the humanities, where you would have to sort of present a very clear sort of question. So what it allows for is sort of a more open-ended exploration. And the methods that you might use are, again, not confined to one disciplinary sort of intention. So depending on the type of thing that you're looking at and the type of work you're trying to produce, you might shift between different disciplines, or you might delve into one sort of particular methodology to a greater degree, to a greater extent. And then again, at the end of the day, like the intention of production is poetic. It's not objective in that sense. So the two people looking at the same artwork might have entirely different interpretations of it. Whereas with an academic paper, like the hope is that everyone that reads it gets the same idea. So I think in that there is a certain level of distinction or positioning in terms of how the research and the knowledge component within the art operate.
I think in other words, what Pranab just said, I mean, another way of saying it, and I'm going to use these words that I know Pratisthi doesn't like to hear, ontology and epistemology. So that's one of the things is how an artist approaches reality, the sense of reality. You know, what is their assumption about what is real, and how do they bring it as a part of expression? But then, what is their epistemological grounds on which they do their work? You know, how do they come to know what they want to, especially when you go into surrealism or anything other than realistic art. I mean, I think there are different ways of kind of understanding the world, and I think that is the purpose of art, is to expand and enhance our understanding of the world. Knowledge, that sort of knowledge in itself is virtuous, is the assumption. There was a quote I want to kind of just put it. This is from Hank Slager on the pleasure. It's in the pleasure of research, and he says the artistic research is characterized by. I'm just kind of rephrasing it, paraphrasing some of the stuff he said. Artistic research is characterized by a capacity to continuously engage in novel, unexpected, epistemological relations in a methodological process of interconnectivity. I mean, you can kind of unpack that, but the way my assumptions, my understanding from that is the artists see the world in particular ways that sometimes are not accessible to someone like me who's used to seeing the world in particular ways, and I think that knowledge is also very, very useful. I mean, it's kind of useful not in a purely utilitarian sense, but in a broader sense, and also in a very ethical sense as well. When you think about knowledge production, when we bring the critical part into how we see the world and understand the world, and we did see a little bit of that also in some of the MFA students who wanted to, through their work, express an alternative expression of reality in terms of how they experience the world based on their own social cultural positions. And that was also very much appreciated, and that was another very a source of learning for me. In the interest of time, I just think should talk about a little bit into the teaching practices because we don't have a lot of time. So where do you begin? I'll just quickly go through what it was like for me. That's okay, and then so.
Let me just add one thing about the program.
Sure.
Just before we get into teaching practices, when you join the MFA program, there are different sort of streams that you can sort of pick. So there's a studio stream where you work in the studio and produce what would be an artwork. So it could be a painting, it could be a sculpture, it could be a performance piece, it could be something that you sort of put into an exhibition. Then you have a design stream where you use design to produce something. So it could be clothing, could be game, could be anything that you sort of conceivably could design. The other two streams we had during the 2 years that we taught were arts education, so using art as a tool for educational practice, and curatorial practice, which is the stream that I studied, which is about presenting things in a aesthetically pleasing or politically charged manner, depending on your preferences. So those were the sort of 4 streams. The current MFA program has visual narrative stream, and what we've done is we've sort of combined the arts education and curatorial practice into one stream, and we're calling it public pedagogy and arts engagement.
Arts pedagogy is
Yeah.
close enough.
Arts pedagogy and public engagement is the program. One of the challenges that you have when you teach research in a program like this, where you have like students that are doing very radically different things, is coming up with methodological or certain methods that would be useful for everyone. So with that, I'm going to let you speak about that difficulty.
The difficulty, I have to acknowledge, Amina was also a co-conspirator in figuring out how to teach research. She was also one, she still is actually, at Stop Teaching, she still teaches there. So I try to use as much as possible the expertise of my colleagues to figure out how to do it. And my approach in the first day, because it was basically, I just did not know what I was doing or how I should be going. My question was, what do they need to learn? That was my question. What would be useful for them? And that's where Pranab was very helpful. So so even the curriculum was very fluid first in the first cohort. Apologies to all the students who went through that. I was literally like doing week to week, like this week what happened in the classroom. Based on that, what do we need to do in the next class? What kind of activities do we need to do? So that's how we went about it. The first semester we focused a lot on just figuring out what is that one issue you want to focus on in producing your art. So we kind of asked them to write, just do free thinking, writing about what. I think one prompt I gave them is what moves you. Just write 500 words about that. And then in the second semester, we focused a lot on methods. What are the different methods that you are already using? So there were a couple of things. I think one of the things I felt is a lot of the artist students in the class were already doing research. Whether they thought they were doing research or not was a different thing, but they were already doing research in their work. So it was almost like visibilizing that, like making it open. I remember Praveen kind of gave a really nice presentation. You talked about the work that you did for your story, right? I forgot the book. You did, didn't I?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Okay. No, you talked about the research work you did on how you did interviews in Rustam. That was very insightful, but then I felt that at that time you did not consider that as research. I mean, I guess you did, but not as academic research. But you were already doing a lot of that work. So it was about how do you recognize your own work in that way. Not that it needs that, but we live in the world that we live in, so sometimes you need to do that. But the other thing is then also explore what are the different practices. And I remember that was the semester when we brought in. Not I didn't bring him, but our friend in Germany, my memory is not so. Fidel, yeah. Fidel was invited, he gave a class on visual anthropology, and that again, opened up a whole new way of looking at things. So it was like, trial and error sort of approach is what I did. Finally, I think towards the end, I think for me, every semester, a lot of the evaluation was based on what were they writing and how they were expressing the ideas and concepts through their writing. That was the only thing I was doing, but they were also being evaluated by my other colleagues. For instance, Amina was heading the studio art. She would look at the studio art component of the work. So it was all very interrelated. So they were writing about the studio artwork in my class, in the research class, right? So that sort of helped as well, and I hope it did not put a lot of load on the students as well. I think one of the most contentious issues that we had, which I had some discomfort with, was towards the end for the final thesis. So all students, because they're artistic students, art students, it was given that they would have to produce a piece of artwork. But then they were also required to write a thesis around it. And we thought that was way too much work. I thought it was way too much work. But the institution and the academic leaders insisted. So that's what we did, I guess, in the end. So they had we had a exhibition where the students exhibited their work. We also had a conference with that where we discussed the work, and then they were all required to write. I think the word limit was 10,000 words. Was it? Yeah, it was around 10,000. Yeah, and we call it exegesis, where they have to kind of explain their work. I want to kind of hand it over to you to talk a little bit about how was it for you, because he was one of the students and I just happened to be his supervisor, supervising his work, his written work. So if you could kind of give your reflections and how was it for you?
So I mean, the MFA experience for me was quite interesting because I was partly co-teaching the course with Amina as well. So I was having a lot of conversations in terms of like how to sort of design and run the course as well, while also being a student in the course. So that being sort of in between these two spaces for me was useful in terms of sort of thinking about like how a course like this could potentially run. I'll talk a bit about like how I'm running the course now. I'm teaching the course now in the MFA, and I'll talk a bit about how our experience sort of led to the way that I've structured it this time around. But for me, I think because I've been teaching the BFA for so long, and there was, I'd say, a lack of real support within the program for like rigorous writing and academic sort of research within the undergrad program. It was kind of useful and kind of nice to have somebody and to be able to talk about how research could potentially happen in the arts. I think those conversations within the BFA program weren't as pressing, partly because the requirements within the BFA program aren't as stringent as within the MFA program. And partly because within the BFA program, the type of research that they do is largely art historical, is what I would say. It's not really geared towards supporting their research per se. It's more about them building an understanding of the artwork that they're about to do. So in terms of my experience as a student, I think it was what I found useful, I should say, is the sort of engagement with the broader ideas of how research happens within other disciplines, where how certain positions are taken within different disciplines in terms of how research happens, and the challenges of adopting a particular disciplinary sort of process or disciplinary methodology within the arts. So if you were to take a visual anthropology approach to producing something in the arts, you're no longer in some ways producing art, you're actually producing an anthropological study. So by default almost, you're sort of moving away from the discipline that you're actually working on and being more confined almost within a disciplinary sort of framework that you might not necessarily have been sort of trying to work out. So I think those challenges, I thought a lot of the students in the program like sort of faced those challenges, including myself, I'd say, in terms of what would be the right way to go about doing this. I think, especially for people that are doing like studio work and design work, these challenges become even more sort of in your face. Because as a curatorial student, you are already in some ways doing research on the arts. You're not really producing art of your own. You're taking on people's art and sort of presenting it in a particular way. So that is already doing research from a humanistic, within a humanities framework of art history. But yeah, I think for practitioners, it was challenging for them because we introduce them to various methods, and then they would feel compelled almost to sort of try to adopt those methods within the work that they were doing, just because those were the sort of methods that we were introduced to. So I felt that wasn't I mean, it was useful, I'd say, but also not entirely useful for them to produce art as well.
Can you speak a little bit
Oh,
what was your project?
I would say we should think about opening. So yeah.
What do you want
Mm,
to just end with your work and you just reference?
so, and I think part of what we did with this, the new board's MFA research program is to not focus so much on the methods. So in the previous board, we were really introducing to like specific methods. So each almost class we introduce to a particular method that they could potentially use. But this time around, I think the approach has been largely allowing them, giving them space almost to engage with the broader problems of research rather than focusing on particular methods and letting them figure out what method might potentially suit their artwork better. In terms of the last cohort, I mean, I brought these catalogs along that sort of give you a sense of like the different works that the students produced, including my work, and you'll also get to see what the different conversations that we were having as part of the exhibition and the topics that were organized around it. So I'll just pass these around. You can take a look at them, and and you can, if you want to, if you're online and if you're want something on your phone rather, this leads to the KU LFA, our program's Instagram page, which has pretty much everything that is in the catalog as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amina, and thank you, Pranab. So now it's our turn to ask them questions or comment on what they've said. If you want to do any of that, please raise your hand. हात उठाउँ न हो हस् हस्
अब क्वेसन चाहिँ एलिमेन्ट्री नेचरको हुन्छ होला यो आर्टको क्षेत्रमा होइन तर पनि अब यो म चाहिँ सिभिल सर्भेन्ट हो बेसिकली तर यसो अनुभवमा के छ त्यस्तो मेरो एकजना गुरु हुनुहुन्छ अभि सुवेदी कला समीक्षक उहाँको घरमा डेरामा भन्ने त्यतिखेर बानेश्वरमा कलाकारहरू आउनुहुन्थ्यो एसकेआइबी अथवा अरू थुप्रै उहाँहरू आउनुहुन्थ्यो सिबिडीकोमा नरसिंह भक्त तुलाचन पनि आउनुहुन्थ्यो नारायण बहादुर सिंह गोतापत्रमा काम गर्नुहुन्थ्यो अर्को बालकृष्ण शर्मासँग पनि उहाँको कुराकानी हुन्थ्यो अहिले त हाम्रो अब काठमाडौँ युनिभर्सिटीमा आर्ट्सको युनिभर्सिटी नै चलिसकेको छ उता ट्युमा पनि आर्ट्स फ्याकल्टी छ तर त्यहाँ पनि छ अब मलाई चाहिँ के लाग्थ्यो भने यो आर्ट्सको क्षेत्रमा त आफूले लिएर गर्ने होला लेख्ने होला भन्ने लाग्थ्यो तर यसमा टिचिङ पनि हुँदो रहेछ रिसर्च पनि हुँदो रहेछ रिसर्च आउटपुटहरू पनि हुँदो रहेछन् तर यो यसको जेनेसिस र अलिकति इभोल्युसन कस्तो छ हाम्रो नेपालमा कहिलेदेखि सुरु भयो
पढाउने काम
पढाउने युनिभर्सिटीले नै समातेर युनिभर्सिटीले नै समातेर गर्ने त्यो त फ्रेगमेन्टेड रूपमा ठाउँ ठाउँमा हुन्छ एकाडेमी अफ आर्ट्स पनि छ होइन त्यो पनि छ
Well, I think it depends on partly how we define art itself, but university art education was started in the 1930s. I might be wrong, with Jutta Kala. Basically, it was a school that Kesar Sitka and Chandraman Singh were two of the people that were sort of involved with it. But I think research as an idea of teaching within the arts is relatively new. These schools were largely sort of focused on building technical skill. So they were geared towards making you a better painter, a better sculptor, a better sort of craftsperson in some ways. the more recent sort of conversation around research within the arts is I'd say starts in the 90s, I'd say maybe, with the introduction of newer forms of art, including installation work and performance art. So, yeah, that's the sort of way to see it, I guess. Like, not in terms of like art education itself. Like, I mean, traditionally, like artists would sort of train under a master, so that type of education has hundreds of years, centuries of history, let's say. But this particular sort of form of it is relatively new. I'd say like 20, 30 years.
हाम्रो प्रस्तुतिले खासै मान्छे जिज्ञासु बनाइरहेको
Yeah. I was, you, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Namaste, म कञ्चन मैले अब पहिला एमएफए गरेर म चाहिँ खास 2 इयर्ससम्म मैले पनि भन्नु पिएचडी डिपार्टमेन्टमै एडमिनमा काम गरेको थिएँ। मलाई चाहिँ यो तपाईँहरूले जुन कुरा गर्नुभयो त्यो कन्स्टेन्टली डेली बेसिसमा बाहिर पढ्दाखेरि आइरहेको क्वेसन्सहरू किनकि नेक्स्ट ल्याबमा पनि भेटेको छु मैले उहाँ पनि हामी टिममा। But my question is, because we say it's art, practice-based research when you work around something, and you're talking about social science, but how do you think we could draw from like chemistry or biology? Because they are only experiment going or materials on a, you know, the physical things that we handle. And what could art magically healing or something? Is that something that you've explored, like could we learn from like as a practice space from an artist? Camera is a key draw on this something. Not just from like anthropology but actually because it gets compared, you know, in the knowledge making sense.
I think there's a lot of like science using the arts, I'd say. So whether it's using colors and how they combine, making sculptures, a lot of these things have a, I'd say like a natural science sort of inclination. But I don't think like most artists are really concerned about documenting it like a scientist would. So I mix these colors and this color came out, or you know, like they're not going to write a paper on it because it's just something interesting for them. It's a part of it. It's something that is part of the practice, but isn't necessarily part of the study. Like there's plenty of sculpture with people that, you know, there's particular firing processes, ways that they work with clay that are probably unique to the artists themselves. But they, I guess, aren't looking at it as that kind of research. So they're not really looking for replicability in that sense.
Just to add, त्यो चाहिँ अब मलाई खास गरी धेरै थाहा छैन हैन, भूमिका नै भन्नु। अनि जस्तो मैले चाहिँ मेरो लाइक चाहिँ लर्निङ प्रोसेस चाहिँ कमिङ फ्रम द अदर एन्ड, अनि मलाई फेरि सोशल साइन्स रिसर्च हो, साइन्स पनि त्यति धेरै थाहा नभएको। लाइक वी ह्याड स्टुडेन्ट्स हु वर लाइक प्रोग्रामर्स हैन, हार्ड साइन्सबाटै आएको कम्प्युटर इन्जिनियरहरू, अनि उहाँहरूको प्रोजेक्ट चाहिँ वाज डिजाइनिङ फर्म्स फर इन्स्टेन्स हैन। सो दे निडेड द्याट टेक्निकल स्किल। सो I think MFA program saying one of the things about what was interesting about this program was open in that sense, interdisciplinary. Like good all of the technical skills or very really all the methods or really. But I think one of our approaches was people are already using these methods wherever they learn it from. But how do you then document it and make it visible as part of that practice based on including two I think we're just talking about it right now. It's very it's in the very early stages of the conversation, but I think that is and as you're aware, even globally that conversation is very, very new. So.
I just want to add one more point to that. I think there is a level of documentation that happens with artists, that they do document, like especially sculptors, even bakers, they have a pretty way of documenting. But I guess the question in some ways is, should they document it in a way that is sort of, a knowledge product, in the way that the academia would sort of acknowledge it as a knowledge product? Do they need to do that? And do they need to gain the skills to be able to do that? And what's the value of that is, I think, part of the question. I think this applies with what is considered like sort of traditional arts in Nepal. There's a lot of like skills and knowledge that is present within master artists. So how should that enter academia in a way that is understandable to a broader academic audience or not? Is a question. Because in their own way, they are sort of working with other artists and passing out knowledge down. But does it have to take this form? Is I think the question.
मलाई चाहिँ के सोध्नु मन लाग्थ्यो नि सो आई मिन when you were invited to teach in this program and you said the question is artistहरूलाई research कसरी पढाउने भनेर पिर परेको हैन so but if you had taken a step back and just sort of figure out there's a whole hierarchy of research practices in the social sciences right? But if you step outside of the traditional North American academy, the idea of research has been extended in many different ways. Right? Barefoot research कुरा गर्नेहरुले एक तरिका तन्का छन् अनि अर्जुन उपाध्याय टाइप्सहरुले चाहिँ like when you think about research as a almost like a human rights in his modernity at large framework त्यो सबै सोच्दाखेरि चाहिँ तपाईलाई चाहिँ त्यो अलि के भन्छ पीडा अथवा अप्ठ्यारो किन भएको भनेर बुझ्न अलि अप्ठ्यारो भयो कि कुन सेन्समा भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ so if you extend if you don't get stuck with the idea of knowledge gap as in हाम्रो नेपालमा भन्दाखेरि literature review ले address गर्ने knowledge gap if you don't get stuck with that idea and associate that with research so there's a whole spectrum of what counts as research that's already available in which artists हरुलाई research को बारे सोच्नलाई चाहिँ सगाउनको लागि त्यति अप्ठ्यारो हुनु नपर्ने जस्तो लाग्यो so can you explain that moment?
Thanks for that question. I just had a quick the question very high I think it's because I'm an educator because Nero approach चाहिँ कस्तो हुन्छ भने कुनै पनि course designing गर्दाखेरि if you're the content expert your question will be what content does this person need to know हैन कुनै MFA को मान्छेले research हुँ भनेर स्थापित हुने हो भने that was the question so मैले यो भन्दा अगाडि MPhil मा पढाउँदा MPhil को विद्यार्थीले क्वालिटेटिभ रिसर्चको बारेमा कति सिक्नु पर्छ म MPhil को स्कलर हुनको लागि भनेर कन्टेन्टको एउटा ग्रुप थियो कि दायरा हुन्थ्यो तर मेरो चाहिँ अलिकति एजुकेटेड भएको र मेरो when I do a course design my beginning question is what do these people need to learn उनीहरुको learning needs के हो what will be useful for them and I think for me I was त्यो क्षेत्रमा त म अनभिज्ञ because I did not like I had a sense of what teachers need to learn because I engage with teachers I do a lot of teacher education programs and so I know कि teachers चाहिँ मेरो क्लासमा हुँदा यस्तो टाइपको पर्सपेक्टिभ्सहरु के हुन्छ काम लाग्छ भन्ने थाहा छ School of Management नै त्यही थियो because I worked as a business management consultant for 10 years so I understood what was the knowledge gap so to speak what do these people need artists, I had no clue about artists and I didn't want to undermine their knowledge as well. So research about it, के सिकाउनु पर्ने हो भन्ने चाहिँ मलाई थाहा थियो कि that is what I constantly asked him like BFA मा के सिक्छ MFA मा हामीले भ्यालु एडिसन गर्ने चाहिँ के हो त so that's where my dilemma was. So my approach to curriculum design is different than me.
Yes, please.
I want to know how do you do the evaluation part, because the word itself is so vague. So
context is super. She's a current student. That's why she's
Give everybody an A. Sorry.
This general answer saying how do you do the evaluation in the sense again it's like what do they need to learn भनेर हामीले एउटा सर्टेन लर्निङ गोल सेट गरे हुन्छ हैन जस्तो मेरो लागि चाहिँ if the students, for me, one of the things I had parameters I had is kind of following the progress that the student had from the first semester. Going to semester one, it's about fancy work or essay idea. By the time they reached towards the end of semester, particular idea expand. So the evaluation was to what extent do they engage with the content. For instance, because I also supervised her work. So she was playing with. So she brought up some ideas in her initial essay. And so now go and read about this, because if they have an idea on you, then you need to understand how other people are using these ideas in the input. So to what extent she was able to engage with the broader literature on that, on Pauva painting, because that's what her work was, and what are other people doing, what are other people's practices, and go and examine that. So I was looking at some specific learning outcomes, and to what extent she is able to situate her own voice as a Pauva artist into the broader discourse of Pauva artistic practice. On the final thesis, that is what was my intention in terms of guiding, and I did see a huge difference in the first writings and the final writings. So, मेरो लागि चाहिँ as an educator, मलाई चाहिँ के कुराको आभास हुन्छ भने त्यो मान्छे केही सिकिरहेछ, there's growth. Okay? So every student is kind of evaluated based on their learning journey. This music you now, how are you doing it?
I think just to give a bit of context, like when we were sort of designing this course, we did a bit of research in terms of how are other MFA programs sort of assessing their students. There's three broad sort of positions. One is you do your artwork and you produce a thesis, which is normally like a thesis on the art. So you pick an artist, you pick a medium, pick something that, and you do research on it and speak about it. There's another sort of format that is relatively new that is, depending on the type of work you're doing and depending on the type of writing you want to do, you can do, like 5,000 word essay and like artwork. So, or you do like a 20,000 word essay and a small artwork. So there's a sliding scale kind of idea in terms of how much time does it take this student to do these two things, and how much time should they give to one of these things. And then the third one, which is, I guess the model that we adopted, is you do a certain length, certain requirement thesis that is mostly about the artwork that we did. So you write about like the research that we did for the artwork, called the and you produce an artwork. So those are the three general models that have been in practice, or at least those are the three dominant models that we saw that were being used in different art schools. And I think we sort of, with my cohort, we sort of gave them options of taking any three of these approaches, because we were quite open towards letting the students decide where their focus wanted to be. Yeah, so in terms of evaluation, I think those are the sort of parameters, I'd say. But in terms of evaluation, I think it's largely again, how well are you invested and engaged in the ideas, and how well have you been able to share it in a form that is understandable to a wider community. Because I think one of the requirements for the knowledge component of within this is that it is publicly available, it is shareable, it's accessible to other people, and it contributes towards a sort of understanding or knowledge building exercise that most of, I guess, university students are, university spaces are engaged in.
Sachin.
Thank you. Respected for who is following the bilingual method, and I would choose to speak in Nepali. अब मैले सुन्नु खोजेको चाहिँ के भनेदेखि जस्तै दुई तिनवटा कुरा अब म एज एन्थ्रोपोलोजिस्ट र फिल्म मेकरलाई जसले फिल्म कलेजमा पढाइरहँदाखेरि रिसर्च पेपर पढाइरहँदाखेरि चाहिँ सबभन्दा पहिला त्यो कोर्स करिकुलम हातमा आइसकेपछि चाहिँ अब कस्तो छ त भनेर मैले हेरिसकेपछि अब हाम्रो फिल्म कलेज त स्कुल अफ सोसल साइन्स अन्तर्गत स्वीकृति लिएको अनि बढी सोसल साइन्स र रिसर्च मेथोलोजीहरू नै रहेछ। अब त्यो भइसकेपछि अनि कसरी इभ्यालुएसन हुन्छ के हुन्छ हामीमाथि पनि कसरी इभ्यालुएसन गर्छ गर्दैन भनेर हेर्दा हामीले एउटा इन्स्टिट्युसनल लेभलमा नै आफ्नो काम गर्नुपर्ने रहेछ, क्वालिटी मेन्टेन गर्नुपर्ने रहेछ भने थाहा पाइसकेपछि अब हाम्रो चाहिँ त्यहाँनिर एउटा पोजिसनालिटीको कुरो चाहिँ एकदमै डिस्कस भयो क्या। हामी एस्थेटिक रिसर्च बढी चाहिँ प्रिफर गर्ने कि नेपाली फिल्म इन्डस्ट्रीले अहिले एकदमै भोगिरहेको समस्यामा रिसर्च गर्ने भन्दा सबैजना चाहिँ कन्भिन्स के भयो भने एकदमै डाइरेक्ट समस्यामा रिसर्च गर्दा चाहिँ फिल्म इन्डस्ट्रीले डिस्कस गर्छ, डिबेट गर्छ, त्यहाँ सबैजना हाम्रो स्टुडेन्टहरूको र जो रिसर्च गर्ने प्रोसेसमा छिर्छन्, एकदमै एउटा ग्याल्भनाइजको प्रोसेसमा जान्छ इन्डस्ट्रीले यो छलफलमा भनेर हामीले चाहिँ जानी पहिलो साल चाहिँ एकदमै बढी फिल्म इन्डस्ट्रीले भोगेको प्रब्लमहरूमा 60जना स्टुडेन्टमा झन्डै 40जना जतिले रिसर्च गरे। अनि त्यसपछि अब सेकेन्ड सालमा पनि त्यस्तै धेरै जस्तो अहिले उनीहरूको ब्याचले त्यस्तै नै गइरहेछन्। अब अनि हामीले चाहिँ जानी बुझिकन एकदमै डिरेक्ट प्रब्लममै जाने यो एस्थेटिक पार्ट हो, यहाँ थ्योरीहरू मेन्सन पनि छैन, केही पनि छैन भनेर हामीले त्यो गऱ्यौँ। तर अस्ति हङकङको रिसर्चमा म गएर आउँदाखेरि चाहिँ अधिकांश एस्थेटिक रिसर्च प्रेजेन्टेसन गरेपछि चाहिँ मलाई चाहिँ एस्थेटिक रिसर्चप्रति म पर्सनल्ली अर्को प्रोफेसन फिल्म मेकर भएको नाताले आजको दिनमा फिल्म इन्डस्ट्रीमा नेपाली फिल्म इन्डस्ट्रीमा चाहिँ एस्थेटिक रिसर्चप्रति धेरै फेसिनेसन हुनुपर्छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्यो। किन लाग्यो भने त धेरै कारण छ कि अब त्यो उनीहरूको त त्यत्रो 3 दिन 4 दिन रिसर्च सुन्दाखेरि पनि त्यो रिसर्च 4 दिन सुन्दाखेरि पनि मैले कुनै पनि देशको कुनै पनि इन्डस्ट्रीको एक लाइन प्रब्लम पनि थाहा पाइनँ कि। अब होला उनीहरूको इन्डस्ट्री एकदमै म्याच्योर भइसकेको छ, उनीहरूलाई त्यो इन्डस्ट्रीको बारेमा डिस्कस गर्नै पर्दैन, प्रब्लमको सोल्युसन ल्याउनै पर्दैन, त्यसकारण एस्थेटिक रिसर्च गरिरहेछ होइन। अथवा होला उनीहरू अर्कै रिसर्च गर्ने अर्कै डोमेन होला, तर हामीले जे चाहिँ कन्सियसली एउटा पोजिसन लियौँ, हामी ठाडो प्रब्लममै रिसर्च गर्छौँ भनेर हामीलाई त्यो नै मजा लाग्यो। अब यसो भन्दाखेरि के हामी चाहिँ स्टुडेन्टहरूलाई चाहिँ जबरजस्ती खालि यो प्रब्लममा मात्र रिसर्च गर त भनिरहेको छौँ त भन्दाखेरि हामीले मेथोलोजिकल प्लुरालिजम फलो गर्ने भनेर हामी त्यहाँ क्वालिटेटिभ पनि पढाउँछौँ, क्वान्टिटेटिभ पनि पढाउँछौँ। जसले आफूलाई त्यहाँ इन्ट्रेस्ट लाग्छ क्वालिटेटिभ र क्वान्टिटेटिभ दुइटै गर्छ। त्यसमध्ये पनि कसैले म यसमा त्यो अब्जेक्टिभहरू बेसिकली 3टा अब्जेक्टिभ लिमिट गर्दा हामी 3टामा एउटा एस्थेटिक रिसर्च पनि गर्छौँ भने एउटा अब्जेक्टिभ एस्थेटिक्ससँग रिलेटेड पनि होला, अर्को सिधै प्रब्लम पनि होला, अर्को फेरि होला भनेर मजाले हामीले त्यो सबैतिर कभर गर्नको निम्ति उ गर्छौँ। अनि मैले तपाईँहरूलाई सोध्न खोजेको चाहिँ यो स्पेसिफिकली तपाईँहरू एज अ रिसर्च गराउँदाखेरि चाहिँ इन्स्टिट्युसनको एउटा पोजिसन हाम्रो मोर प्रायोरिटी चाहिँ आर्टको एस्थेटिकै हो भन्नुहुन्छ कि मोर प्रब्लम बेस्ड रिसर्च चाहिँ हो भन्नुहुन्छ कि के गर्नुहुन्छ, त्यसको पोजिसनालिटीहरूको बारेमा चाहिँ इन्स्टिट्युसनको है मैले त्यस्तो लिनुहुन्छ कि एउटा सोध्न खोजेँ। अर्को चाहिँ एउटा छोटोमा मलाई जानपर्छ त 4:30मा जानपर्छ कि रोटरी अनि यति कुरा सोध्न खोजेँ। जस्तै अब अहिले प्रणव सरले पनि धेरै उ नगरौँ, आर्टिस्टहरूले धेरै कन्ट्रोल नगरौँ भन्नु, अब हाम्रो त झन् फिल्म मेकरहरू झन् पुरै फ्रिडम खोज्छन् होइन। त्यति हुँदाहुँदै पनि अब फिल्ममा एकदमै सेन्सिटिभ विषयमा हेरेसमेन्टको इस्युदेखि यस्तो विषयमा रिसर्च गर्न खोज्छन्। त्यही भएर हामीले चाहिँ फिल्म कलेजमा पहिलोचोटि इन्स्टिट्युसन रिभ्यू कमिटी नै इस्टाब्लिस गरेर अहिलेसम्म जाने बुझेको आफूले संसारभरिको युनिभर्सिटी मतलब जहाँ पुगेर देखियो त्यो बेस्ट प्र्याक्टिस भनेर हामीले जाने जति प्रोटोकलै डेभलप गरेर आइआरसी नै इस्टाब्लिस गरेर हामीले बनाउँछौँ। अब यसमा अब हाम्रो एथिकल इस्यु इन्स्टिट्युसनल कमिटीबाट पार भरै जानुपर्छ। अब तपाईँहरूले यत्रो कुरा सुन्दाखेरि चाहिँ आइआरसीको कुरा इआरबीको कुराहरू यताउति गर्नु भएन, त्यो बाटो के छ भनेर लास्ट होइन लास्ट छोटो।
Take the first question.
So I should say, like, I should qualify myself first. I'm just a physical faculty. I don't speak for the department per se, but based on my experience, I'd say within the undergrad program, there is a clear focus in terms of what these students should do research on, and it's largely research on the arts. So. And specifically on Nepali art. So previously, in the past, students were allowed to do research on anything in the art. So they could do like do a thesis on Picasso or Monet or something like that. But what became quickly obvious was the research should happen on artists in Nepal and art from Nepal. So that's largely the focus within the undergrad program. Within the MFA, I think it's largely guided by the students' own interests. So we're not, there's no like prescription per se from the department, I'd say, in terms of like we have to do research on this. So,
म पनि त्यहाँको अब स्थायी पक्नु होइन होइन, त्यही कारण अब संस्थागत के छ भनेर भन्न सुहाउँदैन हामी दुईजनाले। तर हाम्रो बुझाइ चाहिँ के छ भने अहिलेसम्म एउटा त यो कार्यक्रम एकदम नयाँ भएको भएर यही हो भनेर त्यसरी स्थापित भइसकेको छैन होइन। ओपन नै छौँ। अनि अहिले मैले जुन भने नि हामीले डिजाइन गर्दाखेरि विद्यार्थीको रुचि के हो, किनभने हरेक विद्यार्थीहरूले भर्ना गर्नुभन्दा अगाडि आफ्नो इन्ट्रेस्ट के छ भनेर त्यो पनि व्यक्त गरेर हुनुपर्छ त्यो भर्ना गर्ने क्रममा। अनि हामीलाई अलिकति मोटामोटी अन्दाज हुन्छ क्या स्टुडेन्टहरू कुन रुचबाट आएको छ भनेर। सानो स्कुल हाम्रो कति छ इनरोलमेन्ट 25जना 20जना हो हाम्रो स्टुडेन्ट्सहरू होइन। अनि फ्याकल्टी पनि एकदम सानो छ, सबै कुरा एकदम सानो छ। एकदम यो अलि सुरुमा हामी त्यो अब कसरी गर्नेहरूलाई कसरी हामी चाहिँ क्वालिटी क्वालिटीमा कसरी लैजाने भन्ने त्यो नम्बर 1 एउटा कुरा भयो। जस्तो हाम्रो पहिलो सेमेस्टर पहिलो कोहोर्टबाट चाहिँ केही विद्यार्थीहरूको फिडब्याक चाहिँ हामीले जस्तो क्वान्टिटेटिभमा चाहिँ गर्दैनौँ होइन। सो कसैको त्यो आवश्यकता पऱ्यो भने, किनभने अब स्कुल हो, स्कुलभित्र स्कुल अफ एजुकेसन क्वालिटेटिभको क्लासहरू हुन्छ, पऱ्यो भने उहाँहरूले त्यो क्लासमा इन्भल्भ गरेर पनि चान्स गर्नुहुन्छ। सो एउटा चाहिँ स्कुलभित्र मात्रै सीमित नभएर अरू स्कुलबाट पनि चाहिने कोर्सेसहरू कसरी पुरा गर्ने, त्यो त्यो ओपननेस इन करिकुलम कसरी ल्याउने भन्ने त्यो हाम्रो चाहिँ करिकुलम ओपन नै छ क्या। हामीले इलेक्टिभ भनेर राख्दैछौँ। स्टुडेन्ट्सहरूले आफ्नो प्रोजेक्टलाई चाहिने कोर्सेसहरू कहाँ हुन्छ, कतिले स्कुल अफ जस्तो आर्ट एजुकेसन स्टुडेन्टहरूले स्कुल अफ एजुकेसनमा क्लास लिनुहुन्छ। सो त्यो एउटा भयो। तपाईँले जुन एथिक्सको कुरा भन्नुभयो, अब यो चाहिँ समग्रमा अब के यो भित्रको प्र्याक्टिसको कुरा गर्छु म होइन। मलाई जानकारी भएसम्म छुट्टै एथिक्स रिभ्यू बोर्ड भन्ने हुँदैन, रिसर्च कमिटी हुन्छ। रिसर्च कमिटीले नै त्यो रिसर्चको काम र त्योभित्रको इम्बेडेड एथिक्सको प्रोसेसलाई पनि उहाँहरूले अलिकति त्यो हेर्ने मूल्याङ्कन गर्ने इभ्यालुएट गर्ने त्यो काम गर्छ। यसैमा पनि हाम्रो यो आपको अनलाइन ज्युरी भन्ने शब्द प्रयोग हुँदो रहेछ है, मैले भर्खर सिक्दैछु। अब ज्युरी भनेर बनाउँछ, ज्युरीमा जो हुन्छ हाम्रो फ्याकल्टीहरू नै हुन्छ। हामीले उहाँहरूको प्रोजेक्टहरूलाई इभ्यालुएट गर्दा फिडब्याक दिँदाखेरि एथिक्सको कम्पोनेन्ट पनि त्यसैमा जोडेर आउँछ। रिसर्चको क्रममा व्यवस्थापन युनिट्स वी टक अबाउट एथिक्स। तर हामी सेड द्याट एथिक्स भने छुट्टै पढाउने भन्दा पनि हाम्रो सुरुमै कतिपय कुराहरू हामीले जुन हामी स्थापित जुन विचारहरू छ नि त्यसलाई डिकन्स्ट्रक्ट गर्ने च्यालेन्ज गर्दै गरेर त्यसमाथि एथिकल इस्युजहरू पनि आउँछ क्या। सो एथिक्स भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ त्यो छरिएको छ होइन, त्यो अलिकति इट कम्स इन त्यो डोजेस जस्तो टाइपको त्यसरी छ। इन टर्म्स अफ इन्स्टिट्युसन प्र्याक्टिस त्यो ज्युरीले नै त्यो एथिकल रिभ्यूको जिम्मेवारी पनि लिन्छ।
Yes, please.
जुन थेसिस सकिन्छ नि, थेसिस सकेपछि जुन थेसिस गर्नुभयो, थेसिस गरिसकेपछि चाहिँ अब जुन एज अ नलेज प्रोडक्सन या नलेज एडिसन भन्छ नि एज थेसिस, त्यसमा आफ्टर थेसिस के चेन्ज गर्नु उनीहरूको जुन आर्टवर्क या प्लस उनीहरूको जुन नलेज एडिसनमा त्यसमा कस्तो खालको थेसिसपछि
यसमा अब आई थिङ्क दिस Devas, Alison, Amina would be probably better to answer this question. Did you see any differences after the thesis? भन्ने कुरा मैले आफ्नै विद्यार्थीहरूको मात्रै कुरा गर्दाखेरि अफकोर्स मैले चाहिँ एकदमै पाएँ होइन। अब प्रणबको पनि किताब पनि स्कुलै छ उसको काममा, maybe you can talk about the work. सुमनाको चाहिँ थेसिस पनि छ, आर्टवर्क पनि छ। मैले उसको आर्टवर्क बैठकमा झुन्डी पनि राखेको छ, तिमीले हेर्छु। त्यो हुन्छ नि, उहाँले आफ्नो कामको बारेमा कसरी कुरा गर्नुहुन्छ भन्ने बारेमा चाहिँ त्यो एउटा लेभल अफ एजेन्सी र हुन्छ नि त्यो कन्भिक्सन चाहिँ त्यो चाहिँ प्रष्ट देखिन्छ मेरो लागि चाहिँ। अब तर आई थिङ्क the other people can also add to that.
I'll say that for the people that I had supervised dissertation, my strong encouragement was for them to become an expert on the subject that they had chosen for themselves. So it's really important for me that they become the sort of authority on it, so that they can sort of, so it's for some of them like, digital heritage in Nepal, the person who wrote that dissertation is actually the person. When it comes to the question of digital interpretation or augmented reality, whatever, that person is now the, if not the expert, then on that way to expertise. And I think this answers this other question that someone else had about the sciences. That, one of the advantages of this kind of approach, and the unsaid thing, is that it's a way for artists to assert a kind of authority or sovereignty about a certain field of knowledge production that we are always in contestation with: the humanities, the sciences, policy. And so people who come through the program begin to sort of have a certain vantage. think that's the kind of thing, you know. So it depends on what kind of pieces you adopt. You know, people are taking exegesis, they might end up with the skills to sort of articulate them in a particular way. But I do think that you can't go through the dissertation process without coming out from the other side, whether or not you're happy with the work, without a kind of expertise. No, that's the word for it ultimately. So I think yes, people are. You know, I like to say, one of my students had messaged me and asked me something about their dissertation, and I was like, I'm no longer the authority on this. You are. You know, I'm gonna have to come to you to ask you when, you know, for this question. It's not a question that I can even claim to have any authority, because I actually didn't do the work. Like they did the work. No, I think.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I think some excellent work got done, which I think, like Amshad's sitting right here. I was on his committee. Amshad's produced this incredible sort of memoir of the 90s, of the political history of Nepal in the 1990s to 2000. So I'm really proud of the work that a lot of the students did through the program. So I think the thesis was useful that way too. And we have this excellent sort of work that was done.
यो चाहिँ ongoing process हो भन्ने जस्तो लाग्छ. To be an artist र research, whatever, it's ongoing. यो कहीँ there stop भएर ल यति सक्यो भनेर भन्यो भने you are there मेरो लागि, हैन? So that's एउटा कुरा त्यो भयो. अनि अर्को चाहिँ यो काम गरिरहेको कन्टिन्यू गर्नलाई उनीहरूले त्यहाँ नरोकिकन गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने हो र त्यो कामलाई अझ कसरी इन्हान्स गर्ने, अझ धेरै बलियो बनाउने भनेर त्यो कन्टिन्युस प्रोसेस नै हुन्छ भने. अनि अहिले भने जस्तै दिवसले भने जस्तै अंशको काम मैले पनि एकदम सम्झिन्छु होइन. डे वानदेखि आएर यो लास्टसम्ममा जसरी उसको प्रोग्रेस र जे भयो, अब यो पछि चाहिँ ऊ यस्तो खालको बन्छ होला भनेर वी फिल सो प्राउड. र अब त्यहाँ गएर ब्रेक हुनु भएन भन्ने खालको एउटा कुरा, त्यो चाहिँ हाम्रो कन्ट्रोलभन्दा बाहिर भयो, एउटा कुरा त्यो भयो. अनि अघि कञ्चनले भनेकोमा चाहिँ हाम्रो छ नि जस्तो केमिस्ट्रीको अथवा फिजिक्सको जुन चाहिँ रिसर्चलाई एउटा नलेज भनेर हेर्छ, हाम्रो कामलाई किन हेर्दैन भनेर भन्दा, आइम गिभिङ योर एक्जाम्पल प्रत्युष, पछि मलाई गाली गर्नु पऱ्यो. आर्टलाई एकाडेमियाको धेरै जस्तो उसमा चाहिँ यो नलेजै होइन, यिनीहरू त फर्का फुर्र के जे गर्न मन लागिरहेछ गरिरहेछ भनेर हेर्छ, त्यही हेर्नेमा पहिला अहिले चेन्ज भएको छ होला. तर प्रत्युष पनि त्यसै हो, यिनीहरूको त्यो केही बुद्धिसुद्धि भएको मान्छे होइन. अनि त्यो खालको भएर अनि यो कामलाई चाहिँ भ्याल्यु नदिने, अहिले एमएफएमा यो रिसर्च र यो ल्याएर कसरी हुन्छ हाम्रो पनि नलेज हो है भनेर एकदम त्यो ठोक्नलाई नै एक किसिमले गरे जस्तो भन्छ होइन. त्यसकारण त्यसलाई कसरी खोटल्ने, उसले कसरी दिइरहेछ त्यसलाई कसरी हेर्ने भन्ने खालको अलिकति वाइडर र ओपननेस चाहिँ भयो भने चाहिँ सजिलो हुन्छ. र अफकोर्स होइन, वर्डको लिमिटेसन एउटा ठाउँमा हुन्छ भने वर्डभन्दा बाहेकको एक्सप्रेसन र उसको नलेजलाई चाहिँ कसरी बुझ्ने र कसरी हेर्ने भन्ने खालको कुरा नै ठुलो होला. अनि त्योलाई चाहिँ त्यो वर्डको उसबाट चाहिँ अलिकति बाहिर निस्केर कसरी अर्कोलाई पनि हेरौँ भनेर हेर्न थाल्यो भने चाहिँ ठिक होला जस्तो लाग्छ. सो सरी,
विरोध गर्नै पर्छ. यो कोठामा मलाई चिन्नेहरूले चाहिँ उहाँले भन्नुभएको शब्द मैले भने भनेर तपाईँहरूले विश्वास गर्नुहुन्छ, मलाई पटक्कै लाग्दैन. मैले भनेको शब्द चाहिँ के हो भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ आर्टवर्कको बारेमा मलाई के पनि थाहा छैन. त्यस कारण तपाईँले केही कुरा लेख्नलाई मलाई अनुरोध गर्नुभयो भने म चाहिँ डाइरेक्टली त्यो काम गर्दिनँ भनेर म पहिले भन्छु भनेर मैले त्यो चाहिँ धेरैचोटि भनेको होइन. सो द्याट कम्स फ्रम द फ्याक्ट that I pretty much know what I'm able to do and I'm not able to do. So not able to do लाई चाहिँ तपाईँको रेन्ड्रेसन चाहिँ अलिकति झेली खालको भयो कि त्यो त्यसरी चाहिँ झेली गर्न मिलेन. र इट अल्सो इज एक्चुअली लिङ्क टु विथ what you said, I don't like the words epistemology and ontology. No, I found out that I've actually used those words in my own previous writings. Okay? I've forgotten that. It's not that I don't like these words. In particular circles in Kathmandu University, and you know this who I'm talking about, त्यहाँ चाहिँ यो ontology र epistemology को गफ यसरी हुन्छ कि त्यो मेबी रिसर्च र रिसर्चको सञ्चारबारे सोच्ने मान्छे सबैले ontology र epistemology को गफ पहिला गरेर अनि मात्र रिसर्च बुझ्छन् भन्ने किसिमले कुरा बुझाइन्छ। जिन्दगीमा मैले ontology र epistemology दालभात खास्दै खाने मान्छेहरूसँग सङ्गत गरेको हुनाले चाहिँ त्यो किसिमको बुझाइ भएका मान्छेहरू पनि छन् भन्ने थाहा छ। मेरो आफ्नो डिसस्याटिस्फ्याक्सन चाहिँ कहाँबाट आउँछ भन्दाखेरि 1 घण्टा ontology र epistemology को गफ गरिसकेपछि अनि बाँकी कथा के पनि बाँकी छैन के उहाँहरुसँग। भनेको कुनै विषयमा उहाँहरूले रिसर्च गर्नु भएको छ र they spend like multiple number of years actually doing that work. They ought to be able to come here and spend like maybe 1 घण्टा 2 घण्टा on a pretty interesting way of conveying that message. And when I've encountered person after person, School of Education is a great example. Person after person in that school where they can speak the language of ontology, epistemology, तर कथा चाहिँ के पनि छैन। अनि मलाई चाहिँ त्यो नेपालीमा हामी भन्छ नि हामी त खुस्स हुन्छ नि त्यस्तो हुन्छ कि त्यो yeah, that's my dissatisfaction is भनौँ न।
Thanks for that clarity. तपाईँको सुनिरहेको हुन्छु मैले and I've heard it so many times. तपाईँको इस्यु चाहिँ के हो with those words and has
अनि फेरि अहिले मैले अगाडि प्रत्युष भएर प्रत्युषको नाम लिएर किनभने त्यो आई थिङ्क आई हेभ लिबर्टी टु भनेर गरेको हो होइन तर धेरैको कुरा चाहिँ त्यस्तै भएर हुन्छ।
Yes, please.
Let me see if I can articulate this question I have in mind. So, Amina dile starting तिर भन्नुभयो नि, what do artists need? Thinking where I work from or how I operate might not be how artists operate and there's always this like, oh, artists operate from the feelings and emotions and all that, which I don't deny. So I think what I'm trying to get at is, and again, for the like artists who research, it's a reflexive process from there. So as people who taught research to artists and through your guidance process, what do you think for them to go into that reflexive process? I mean, till research process you can't even to write that exegesis. From that like blog that is blog like why do we do what we do and verbalizing, articulating what your processes are. How important so in this 2 years of your process as teachers, where do you find like, hey, you guidance say काम लाग्यो अथवा यसरी गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ आर्टिस्टहरुलाई चाहिँ यस्तो चाहिँ काम लाग्यो भनेर सोच्दाखेरि चाहिँ कहाँबाट के छ?
Thank you so much for that question. किनभने मलाई एउटा पोइन्ट मेरो लागि एउटा आहा मोमेन्ट चाहिँ इभन प्रणव म कफी खाइरहेको बेला मैले भनेकै प्रणवलाई मैले मेरो होल अप्रोच दिस कोर्स वाज आर्टिस्टहरूलाई के चाहिन्छ लाइक के हुन्छ आर्टिस्टलाई के पढाउनु पर्छ भनेर मैले सोचेँ भन्दाखेरि आई डोन्ट थिङ्क लाइक द्याट मेबी भनेकै I don't think like I'm teaching artists, I'm just teaching students who need to learn. उसले त्यसरी भन्थ्यो कि होइन त्यो बेला मलाई है मैले किन यस्तरी बक्स गरेर हाल्दा मान्छेहरूलाई भन्ने चाहिँ भएको थियो कि मलाई सो द्याट्स समथिङ आई काइन्ड अफ लर्न टु लेट गो एज वेल लाइक दिज आर जस्ट लाइक मेरो सो त्यो डिसिप्लिनरी त्यो चाहिँ मैले साइडो आई रियलाइज आई ह्याड द्याट डिसिप्लिनरी साइड इन माई हेड के अरू आई टक अबाउट इट होइन त्यसरी सोच हुँदैन भनेर सो द्याट वाज शिफ्ट द्याट आई बिन ह्यापी टु लिभ विथ एज तर अब नाउ मेबी इन द फ्युचर आई क्यान युज द्याट सो त्यो एउटा भयो होइन तर आई थिङ्क इट्स काइन्ड अफ युनिभर्सलै भन्नु पऱ्यो अक्रस अल स्टुडेन्ट्स इभन स्कुल अफ एजुकेसन स्टुडेन्ट्स इज हाउ टु own your own knowledge and your wisdom that comes from practice. Teachers are पनि त्यही हो होइन 20 वर्ष पढाइ हुन्छ थाहा हुन्छ तर के थाहा छ भन्दाखेरि भन्न आउँदैन कि किनभने सोचेकै छैन रिफ्लेक्ट गरेकै छैन मैले क्लासमा पढाइ नहुँदाखेरि केले काम गराएछ छैन भनेर सोचेकै छैन नि त सो आर्टिस्टहरू पनि त्यही हो काम गराएछ तर इफ यु आस्क देम अबाउट द टेक्निक्स एन्ड प्र्याक्टिस दे डोन्ट ह्याभ द ल्याङ्ग्वेज त्यो प्याकेज गराएको छैन क्या मैले न्यारेटिभ इन्क्वायरी गराउनु मात्रै भन्छु कि स्टुडेन्ट्सहरूलाई people don't sit around with a ready-made story to tell you just so that a researcher happens to come and interview you. You know? Narrative is constructed. You know? The construction process is so many things that happens. You know? I think primarily is identity formation as a knowledge builder. Okay? I think that's the most difficult task. So I think it's a constant struggle. All of us have. I still have that. You know? I still it's a psychological process for me. I mean, those assertions, I mean, in the writing that comes through, this shifts are a little modified. You know, the way you write in the beginning, okay, so I mean, the way you kind of take command. I mean, Alison, you're an expert because you've done so much work. You know how to do this thing, so you know how to write about it. At least you know what you do. After practice, so त्यो चाहिँ shift मैले अलिकति पाएको पनि हो अनि अस्ति भएको something I kind of witnessed was अस्तिको semester endमा and if I could speak about it one of the evaluations that Pranab did was very interesting choice अनि सुबन त्यही सोधे होला यसलाई हामीलाई क्लासमा gave two options हैन some students could curate a panel discussion and hold a panel discussion about their work हैन and some students could choose to write a paper हैन I mean, this detail of slip on sorry. I sat and observed the panel, right? Panel is so really. On the panel, so basically, I asked him like how he can evaluate it, and then he had his own ideas. And so we have to then think about what are some of the exercises you can do. So writing is one thing, but there are other ways of constructing your own narrative about your practice and your work, owning it, and forming that strong sense of identity of I know my work, and this is why. And this is how I'm going to present it to the world. Two process okay, अब hospital भने जस्तो फेरि यो एक सेमेस्टरमा हामीले गर्नु कुरा पनि होइन के It's just a beginning, a glimpse the idea. This will be a lifelong process for them भन्ने चाहिँ मेरो विचार हो. Okay, now put you on the spot.
I think for a long time I thought like writing was the primary reflective tool that would be useful. I'm increasingly sort of questioning that position partly. I still think that writing is very useful as a sort of tool. But given recent technological developments like AI, what you write and what you write for are increasingly changing, I think. So what the artists, like in the past, like before AI goes on, and like writing an artist statement itself was a huge challenge for a lot of artists. So just being able to sort of articulate, this is the reason, or this is what, and sort of tackling these are the ideas, I think articulating that was a huge challenge. I think to some degree, the challenge for the artist now is to talk about their work more than to write about it. If you can talk about it properly, then yeah, you can sort of formulate it in a half-decent sort of framework for you. So I think, yeah, I mean, what has, I guess, worked the most is not being too concerned about like the idea per se that is being written down, but the way that things are being articulated and the intention behind it. I think that's the way that I put it. Like, I don't really assess students in terms of how accurately are you close to a particular idea, or how well have you been able to like explain a particular idea, as much as how you've been able to sort of engage with it and reflect upon it and sort of position that idea in relation to what you see in the world or what is happening inside of you.
So we need to stop here officially. अब उहाँहरु दुईजनालाई र अरूहरुलाई पनि फुर्सद भयो भने बाहिर बसेर जति गफ गरे पनि भइहाल्यो. So thank you Amina and thank you Pranab for giving us the reason to be here. And hopefully, this conversation will give birth to other conversations, and students, former students were students in this program are always welcome to present their work. So please let us know when about the next slots that are available are in September, and then we go into the Dasai Tihar break. So after Dasai Tihar break, we've not scheduled anything yet. So we can always schedule. I mean, you're welcome to come and present your work. Thank you. Yeah.